Do you really think this guy understands anything we're talking about? Jonathan Miller didn't even bother to lower his voice as he smiled across the conference table. Michael Turner chuckled sarcastically and replied, I doubt it, but hey, $50 million for a quiet little Asian robot? I'll take that deal any day. That's how it all started. A private meeting on the 100th floor of New York's most exclusive skyscraper, with a panoramic view of Manhattan. What was supposed to be a historic partnership turned into something much dirtier. A silent war of glances, contempt, and pure prejudice. At the head of the table sat Wei Zhang, a Chinese billionaire who built his technology empire from scratch. His company, Dragon Tech Industries, had revolutionized medical robotics in Asia and was now ready to conquer the American market. Wei did not speak English during the meeting. Not because he couldn't, but because he chose not to. It was her armor against Western arrogance. And there, discreetly serving coffee and organizing documents, was Andre Silva. 26 years old, black skin, short hair, standing straight as a soldier. To everyone in the room, he was just another invisible employee of the catering company. But Andre wasn't just serving coffee. He was watching everything. Every whispered word, every microaggression, every insult muttered as if it were inaudible. But Andre heard everything. The snickers, the snapping of fingers treating him like a servant, the racist insinuations, the reduction of Wei to nothing more than an exotic obstacle in his path to conquest. What happened next was not just a business reversal. It was a revolution disguised as coffee service. The Miller Corp boardroom occupied the entire top floor of the glass and steel building in the financial heart of Manhattan. It wasn't just an office, it was a statement of power. Dark oak paneling stretched from floor to ceiling. The conference table, a masterpiece of Italian marble, reflected the golden lights of the crystal chandeliers that hung like suspended jewels. Jonathan Miller, CEO of Miller Corp, looked impeccable in his $3,000 navy blue suit. Tall with gray hair combed back, he wore the calculated smile of someone who always expected to win. At his side sat Michael Turner, vice president, younger, more aggressive, more impatient. His Swiss watch gleamed brighter than his predatory smile. Across the table sat the man they believed they were about to conquer. Wei Zhang wore a simple, black, unostentatious suit. His dark hair was perfectly aligned, his hands still on the table. At 52, he had built a $2 billion empire in medical technology, but in that room, he was treated like an Asian curiosity. His translator, a thin, middle-aged man, sat slightly behind him, offering whispered translations when necessary. But most of the time, Wei just listened. His silence made the Americans squirm with impatience. Andre Silva glided between the chairs, adjusting cups, checking that the documents were organized. His name was not on the guest list. Her voice had not yet been heard in the room, but her eyes were taking everything in. He saw Jonathan's condescending smiles, Michael's nervous laughter, and watched Wei, impassive, regal, maintaining her dignity in a room designed to make her feel small. The battle lines were drawn. The room looked luxurious, but beneath the surface, something much colder was brewing. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a test. And none of them knew yet who was really being tested. Andre was only 26 years old, but he carried a lifetime of being underestimated on his back. The son of a maid who worked for the same wealthy family for 16 years, he grew up watching how real power worked behind the scenes. While serving tea in his mother's employer's office, he absorbed conversations about investments, mergers, and acquisitions. He learned that real business happened in whispers, not speeches. But what no one knew was that Andre had spent 3 years in China. He had a scholarship to study engineering at Peking University. He was fluent in Mandarin and knowledgeable about the culture, gestures, and nuances that go beyond words. When he returned to Brazil and then moved to New York, he discovered that being black and speaking Chinese was a combination that people simply couldn't process. So he did temporary jobs, paid his bills, sent money to his mother, and kept his talents quiet. Until tonight. Jonathan raised her glass of scotch with the confidence of a man accustomed to setting the tone. To global business, he said, and to a future where innovation knows no boundaries. He smiled broadly, as if he had just uttered a magazine cover-worthy phrase. Wei simply nodded, raised her glass silently, and took a sip. No words, no translation. Michael leaned over, whispering, "Was that a yes or just a polite nod?" He didn't bother to lower his voice much. Wei said something in Chinese to his translator. The man, expressionless, turned to the table. Mr. Zhang appreciates the sentiment. That was it. And so it went. Jonathan offered long, animated speeches about the transformative potential of merging Dragon Tech's robotic technology with Miller Corp's global distribution. He talked numbers, timelines, market conquest. He gestured as if commanding an invisible audience. Wei responded with a short, measured phrase. The translator converted everything into a neutral sentence. Michael's patience ran out first. He leaned toward Jonathan and muttered, "Are we seriously negotiating with a statue? This is insane." Andre felt the sting behind the word. It wasn't the request, it was the tone, the familiarity that had not been earned. He continued to organize the documents in silence, his hand steady, but her eyes registering every detail. Every disguised insult. Every moment of disrespect. What those men in suits didn't know was that every prejudiced word was being understood perfectly by someone they considered invisible. And Andre Silva, the simple kitchen assistant, was about to show them the real price of arrogance. If it is his enjoyment of this story of justice and reversal, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what happened when Andre finally opened his mouth went far beyond a simple translation. It was a lesson those executives would never forget. The first hour of the meeting was a parade of microaggressions disguised as professional courtesy. Jonathan began to speak more slowly, pronouncing each word as if he were addressing a child. "We want to buy her company," he said, gesturing exaggeratedly. Michael found it hilarious. "Maybe we should draw," Michael whispered, pretending to scribble in the air. "Or use mime. How about a stick figure representing dollars?" Wei Zhang remained impassive. Her answers, always brief, were translated neutrally by the interpreter. But Andre noticed something the executives couldn't see. Wei's fingers were tapping softly on the table in a specific pattern. It was Morse code. Andre knew those signals from his days studying naval engineering at Shanghai University. Wei was sending a silent message, recording everything. "Confirm you understand his." Andre almost choked on the coffee he was serving. Wei knew he spoke Chinese. But how? And how long had the Chinese billionaire known that there was someone in the room who could understand every malicious word being said? Michael stood up abruptly, walking to the window with an air of theatrical impatience. "Jonathan, this is going to take all night. The guy clearly has no real interest in closing the deal." "Patience," Jonathan muttered. "Asians like drama. They pretend to be hard to convince so they can accept anything later." Andre felt his blood boil. Each prejudiced word was like a blade cutting into her skin. But there was something even more painful, the way Wei absorbed each insult without reacting, maintaining her dignity through a silence that Americans interpreted as submission. "You know what irritates me," said Michael, returning to the table. "That Eastern wisdom pose. As if his silence were profound. It's just Asian stubbornness masquerading as philosophy." Jonathan chuckled softly. "He probably doesn't even know what we're offering. 50 million for what, man? For a company that makes little robots for surgery? We can find any startup in San Francisco doing the same thing for 10 million. Andre organized papers with trembling hands. Not from fear, but from controlled rage. Because he knew exactly what Dragon Tech Industries represented. During his 3 years in Shanghai, he had closely followed the development of Wei's surgical robots. They weren't little robots. They were life-saving equipment, reducing error rates in complex heart surgeries by 80%. Wei had 15 registered patents, partnerships with the largest hospitals in Asia, and technology so advanced that American universities had been trying unsuccessfully for years to copy his algorithms. But to Jonathan and Michael, he was just another stubborn Asian with money. Andre's memory went back 3 years. Beijing, winter of 2021. He had just been accepted into the university's exchange program through a scholarship for low-income black students. It was December when he first met Wei at a lecture on technological innovation. Wei had spoken for 2 hours about how medical technology could democratize healthcare in poor countries. Andre was fascinated. After the lecture, he timidly approached Wei to ask a question in his still rudimentary Chinese. "Do you believe that a young Brazilian can contribute to this type of research?" Andre asked in Mandarin. Wei smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen her give. Creativity has no color or nationality, Wei replied in Chinese. She has curiosity. And you clearly have that. In the months that followed, Wei became his unofficial mentor. They talked about engineering, cultural barriers, and how prejudice limited human potential. Wei told him about the difficulties of being taken seriously in the United States, about meetings where American executives assumed he didn't understand English, about fraudulent contracts disguised as partnerships. One day, Wei said on a cold winter afternoon, maybe I'll find someone who really sees me, not just my bank account. Andre never forgot those words. And now, 3 years later, he was witnessing exactly the scenario Wei had predicted. Only this time, Andre was no longer a student watching from afar. He was there, invisible to everyone, but capable of changing everything. Jonathan went back on the attack, his patience officially exhausted. Look, you can tell her boss that our offer is final. 50 million, take it or leave it. If he wants to keep acting out Eastern drama all night, we can leave here now. Michael nodded vigorously. Honestly, all this cultural theater is getting on my nerves. We can find a more cooperative Chinese company, his. That was when Wei spoke directly for the first time, a sentence in Chinese directed into the air, as if he were contemplating the city lights. The translator hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what he had heard. What did he say? Jonathan pressed. The translator cleared his throat. He said he's impressed with American hospitality. But Andre understood perfectly what Wei had really said. Is there anyone in this room who understands the true value of building bridges instead of walls? Those words struck Andre like a bolt of lightning. Wei wasn't just talking about business. He was asking for help. He was looking for someone who could see beyond skin color, nationality, and prejudice disguised as cultural superiority. Andre cleared his throat softly. For the first time that evening, he felt he couldn't remain silent much longer. His hands stopped shaking. His shoulders straightened slightly. Michael tapped his fingers impatiently on the table. How much longer are we going to have to put up with this charade? Honestly, it's like trying to do business with a Chinese wall. Jonathan laughed loudly. At least a wall wouldn't waste his time pretending to be mysterious. Andre clenched his fists. Blood pounded in her temples. Every dismissive word was a reminder of all the times he had been underestimated, ignored, treated as invisible. In school, when teachers assumed he wouldn't understand complex concepts. In college, when classmates feigned surprise to discover that he was a merit scholar, not a quota student. In previous jobs, where her intelligence was constantly questioned. But this time was different. This time, he had power. The power of knowledge, of understanding, of the ability to build bridges where others saw only insurmountable walls. Wei muttered something again in Chinese, almost inaudible. Andre understood perfectly. Is there really anyone here who sees her as a human being? Wei's voice carried a deep sadness that Andre recognized instantly. It was the same sadness that he himself had carried for years. The pain of being reduced to stereotypes, of having her humanity questioned, of being treated as less capable simply because she did not fit the expected mold. Jonathan glanced at the expensive watch on his wrist. Last try, he said, addressing the translator as if Wei were deaf as well as incapable. Tell him that if we don't close this today, the offer is off the table. We don't have time for these Eastern games. Andre took a deep breath. Her hands stopped shaking completely. In fact, they would never tremble again in the presence of those men. Because at that moment, he realized that he was not just a silent witness to an injustice. He was the key to a revolution that was about to explode in the face of all that arrogance. The problem was that Jonathan and Michael had no idea that the simple kitchen assistant carried a secret weapon that could destroy not only that meeting, but the entire reputation she had built over decades. Andre looked at Wei one last time before making the decision that would change everything. And in that look, he saw not only a plea for help, but an opportunity to rewrite the rules of the game forever. Every insult he heard was being meticulously filed away in her memory. Every moment of disrespect was being recorded. And when the time came to speak, Andre would not just translate words. He would translate justice. The opportunity arose when Michael got up to take an urgent call. Sorry, it's from the board, he said, leaving the room with the phone pressed to his ear. Jonathan took the opportunity to pour himself more whiskey, leaving Wei momentarily alone with his translator. That's when Andre pretended to trip on purpose, knocking over an empty tray near Wei's chair. As he bent down to pick up the objects, he quickly whispered in Chinese, "Mr. Zhang, my name is Andre Silva. I understand everything they are saying. Can I help you?" Wei did not turn around, nor did he show any surprise. He just tapped 3 times on the table, Morse code for yes. Then he muttered discreetly in Chinese, "Wait for my cue. When I say sleeping dragon, be ready." Andre felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through his body. Wei wasn't just a victim of prejudice. He was a strategist waiting for the right moment to strike back. Michael returned visibly irritated. "Problems with the shareholders," he muttered. "They're impatient with all this delay. They want a decision today." Jonathan sighed theatrically. Well, maybe his Eastern friend needs to understand that time is money here in America. He addressed Wei directly, speaking loudly and slowly as if talking to someone who was deaf. "We need answer now." The translator began to convert, but Jonathan stopped her with a wave of his hand. "Leave it alone." She understood. Asians may be stubborn, but they're not stupid. Andre clenched his fists discreetly. With each new insult, her determination grew. He had spent his entire life hearing variations of these same words. He may even be smart for a black man. Impressive how well he articulates his words. Unlike the others of his race. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't just suffering prejudice, he was gathering ammunition to destroy it. During his 5-minute break, Andre ran to the bathroom and called his sister Camila, an investigative journalist for the New York Herald. "Camila, I need an urgent favor," he whispered into the phone. "Do you have contacts at the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission?" "Andre? Why are you whispering? And what the hell does his SEC know?" "It's complicated, but I'm witnessing an attempted corporate fraud live. I need to know if anyone can track suspicious bank transfers from Miller Corp over the last 6 months." There was a pause on the other end. Camila knew her brother well enough to know he wasn't exaggerating. "Give me 20 minutes, she said. "And Andre? Be careful." Andre returned to the room just as Michael was completely losing his composure. "Honestly, this has gone beyond ridiculous," she huffed, pacing back and forth. "We make a $50 million offer, and he sits there pretending he's the Emperor of China." Jonathan laughed, clearly enjoying the show. "Calm down, Mike. Let him play his Asian card. In the end, they all cave. It's just a matter of pressure." Wei spoke again in Chinese, a longer sentence this time. The translator hesitated visibly. "Mr. Zhang would like to review the documents more carefully." "Review?" Michael exploded. "There are 15 pages. How long does it take a Chinese person to read 15 pages?" Andre felt his blood boil. He could no longer pretend he was just cleaning tables. His 3 years in Shanghai, studying advanced engineering at China's most competitive university, were reduced to that ignorant comment about reading speed. That's when his phone vibrated discreetly. Message from Camila: "I found something big. Miller Corp has an open investigation for contract manipulation with Asian companies. 2 similar cases in the last 2 years. Both involving fraudulent clauses in acquisitions. Do you need this information?" Andre typed quickly, "I need it. Send everything." Within seconds, his phone was receiving PDF files. SEC reports, complaints from other Asian companies, a clear pattern of predatory behavior. Jonathan and Michael had a history. Wei wasn't the first victim. She was just the next one. Andre organized the information mentally as he continued his work. Dragon Tech wasn't just another robotics company. It was a pioneer in artificial intelligence-assisted surgery, with technology decades ahead of its American competitors. Jonathan and Michael weren't trying to form a partnership, they were attempting technological theft on a billion-dollar scale. Michael checked his watch again. "Last chance," he said, addressing the translator. "Tell him our patience is at an end. Either he accepts now, or we'll look to his competitors." The translator began to speak in Chinese, but Wei gently interrupted her by raising her hand. For the first time that evening, she smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it was loaded with meaning. "Sleeping dragon," Wei said clearly in Chinese, looking directly at Andre. It was the cue. The moment Andre had been waiting for. Her sister had just sent him the ammunition he needed. Wei had set the perfect trap. And now it was time to show these arrogant executives the true price of underestimation. Andre cleared his throat softly. His hands stopped shaking. His shoulders straightened. For the first time in his life, he was about to use his intelligence not to survive, but to dominate. But what Jonathan and Michael didn't know was that the simple kitchen assistant wasn't just about to speak Chinese. He was about to reveal evidence that would put them both in jail. Andre's phone vibrated one last time. Camila had sent the icing on the cake, audio recordings of an internal Miller Corp meeting where Jonathan and Michael openly discussed stealing Chinese technology through rigged contracts and using investors' prejudice against Asians to justify fraudulent acquisitions. Andre took a deep breath. It wasn't just about Wei anymore. It wasn't just about racial prejudice anymore. It was about systematic justice against a pattern of criminal behavior that had lasted for years. Wei drummed on the table again, but this time the pattern was different. Execute now. Andre took a step forward. Jonathan and Michael didn't even notice at first. To them, he was still human furniture. But when Andre stood next to Wei and bowed respectfully, the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. "Gentlemen," Andre said, her voice firm and clear, "there are a few things you need to know about this meeting." Jonathan dropped his whiskey glass. Michael turned his head so quickly that he almost lost his balance. "First," Andre continued, maintaining his Olympian calm, "Mr. Zhang understands English perfectly. He heard every prejudiced word you uttered. Second, I am not just a kitchen assistant. I have a degree in engineering from Shanghai University, I am fluent in Mandarin, and I am a witness to everything that happened here." The color drained completely from Jonathan's face. Michael opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "And third," Andre said, taking his phone out of his pocket, "my sister, she is an investigative journalist, and she just sent me evidence that you have a history of corporate fraud against Asian companies." Wei stood up for the first time that evening. He looked directly at Jonathan and Michael and spoke in perfect English with an impeccable American accent. "Gentlemen, I believe we have a lot to talk about." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the weight of justice about to collapse on 2 decades of arrogance and corporate crime. Andre had not only broken her invisibility. He had detonated a bomb that would destroy his man's lives forever. But there were still secrets in the room that even Andre couldn't imagine. Secrets that would make revenge even sweeter and the fall even more devastating. The silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan Miller, for the first time in his 20-year career, was speechless. Michael Turner seemed to have turned into a statue, his mouth half open, his eyes wide, fixed on Andre. You speak Chinese," stammered Jonathan, her voice high-pitched like a frightened child. "Fluent," replied Andre, keeping his tone calm. 3 years in Shanghai, engineering degree from the most competitive university in China. I heard every insult, every racist joke, every prejudiced comment you made. Andre was his best student," she said in impeccable English. "When I heard he was working temporarily in New York, I specifically asked him to be here today." Michael tried to regain his composure. This is a trap. You set this up." Andre pulled out his phone and showed the screen to both of them. "My sister Camila Silva, from the New York Herald, sent me some interesting evidence about you." He swiped his finger across the screen. "SEC investigation into contract manipulation. 2 Asian companies have already reported you for fraud. 23 million in pending fines. We make the contract really complicated, they sign without understanding it, and we get the technology for free." The recording continued with Jonathan. "It's like stealing candy from a baby. They think we're being respectful with all this cultural ceremony, but we're actually pulling the wool over her eyes." Michael turned white as a sheet. "How did you get this?" Wei stood up slowly, her presence filling the entire room. "Discrete cameras, Mr. Turner. Very advanced Chinese technology. You underestimated not only my intelligence, but also my preparation." Andre connected his phone to the room's projector. SEC documents, internal Miller Corp emails, and a list of Asian companies that had fallen victim to the same scheme appeared on the wall. 16 companies defrauded in 5 years. You specialize in exploiting American investors' prejudice against Asians. Jonathan was clearly desperate. We can negotiate. What do you want? More money? Equity? Wei shook his head slowly. I don't want his dirty money, Mr. Miller. I want justice. Andre pressed another button on the phone. My sister has already sent all this evidence to the FBI, the SEC, and 5 different newspapers. The story will be on the front page tomorrow. Michael slumped in his chair, burying his face in his hands. We're ruined. Wei walked over to Andre and held out his hand. Thank you for having the courage to break the silence, he said in Chinese. Andre replied in the same language, thank you for teaching me that dignity is not negotiable. Jonathan tried one last desperate gambit. You can't do this. We have lawyers, we have influence. Andre smiled for the first time that night. Gentlemen, you have just discovered that you underestimated the wrong people. A silent Asian and an invisible black man. As you like to say, karma is an Asian word. And today she is speaking fluently in justice. The empire of arrogance and prejudice that Jonathan and Michael had built was crumbling in real time. But there was still one last revelation that would make his downfall even more spectacular, and Andre was ready to deliver the final blow. Revenge was just beginning. How would 2 men who thought they were untouchable discover that messing with the wrong people could cost them everything? 6 months later, Andre Silva was sitting in his new office on the 150th floor of the Dragon Tech Americas building, with a privileged view of all of Manhattan. Vice President of International Strategic Relations, salary of $200,000 a year, apartment on the Upper East Side paid for entirely by the company. Jonathan Miller filed for personal bankruptcy 3 months after the scandal. Investigated by the FBI for corporate fraud, he lost his house, his car, his wife, and custody of his children. Michael Turner was sentenced to 2 years in prison and now worked as a used car salesman in the suburbs of Detroit. Miller Corp was bought by Dragon Tech for only $10 million, 1/10 of the original offer they had arrogantly rejected. Do you regret anything? Wei asked during an executive meeting, serving traditional Chinese tea in porcelain cups. Andre smiled, looking out at the city through the glass. I regret taking so long to speak up. Camila's article won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism. The title, The Kitchen Assistant Who Toppled an Empire of Prejudice. Wei created a mentoring program for young black people interested in technology. There were already 15 scholarship recipients studying at the best universities in China, with all costs paid. Do you know what his biggest mistake was? Asked Andre. Assuming that invisibility means insignificance, replied Wei in Portuguese, a language he had learned specifically to honor his Brazilian friend. Jonathan and Michael thought they were buying technology from a silent Chinese man with the help of an invisible black man. They discovered too late that they had messed with the wrong people. The real revenge wasn't destroying their lives. It was building something bigger than they ever dreamed of being. Today, while Jonathan struggles to pay his rent, Andre runs a $2 billion technology empire. The lesson is simple: never underestimate someone you don't know. That invisible person serving his coffee may be fluent in 5 languages. That quiet Asian may be recording every prejudiced word he utters. And when these people finally speak, the whole world will stop to listen. If this story has inspired him to never give up on his dreams, no matter who tries to diminish him, subscribe to the channel. Because stories of justice like this happen every day, and someone needs to tell them.